chimene mukuchionachi kwathu kuno chichewa chomveka bwino timachitcha mlambala pa chizungu chimatchedwa kuti daike. Chomweso tikuchiona kuti kwa ife chikhala chothekera kopambana chifukwa pakubwera mafladzi ano abwera ano ndi achitatu koma sanafike kumakomo. Pamene ichi chipanalibe makhala kuti nthawi zino mwina ndikanakhala tili kukamba. Mu 2022 tinali ni mafladzi a Gombe ndi ana amene anakhudza dera lalikulu kuno kwathu ngati mizi yonse ya muno mwa group ya magoli 12 inakhudzidwa ndipo ngakhale nyumba mitunda mukuona munali manyumba koma anagwa choncho miyoyo ya anthu inali pa chiopsezo.
Ine ndinangoona nyumba imaze kusiririka kulowa nyumba kwa malosi ndiye ndinadabwa. Ndinachosana nyumbamo kwatulusa koma katundu wina ndinalephera kutulusa. Ana onse atulusa naima pabalaza pabwalopa ndiye nthawi yoti nawo imapo nthawi yayitali nawo zakuti pitani kuja mukasape anapita nyumba ija kukagona konko. Ndinangonjuta pakhondepo yanga indaona kuti yasala pang'ono kugwa ndinalumpha ndamuwunikira poti malingana ndi muja ndanena ine kuti mwana yali ndi vuto pang'ono ndinamuzusa naye mmene atuluka naye yache yeso likiti kugwa ndiye ndinangokhala pakhondepo. Mbuye kunali kunjenjemera ndithu. Ineso nali wokhumudwa ndipo katundu iwo ataonongeka nangokhaulira ine. Ndabwezere ndija nkati ngakowa zozo anandigawira ena mbale imodzi wina kapo ndiyendera zozo ndagule ndija.
Could you just tell me in a brief way, what is loss and damage?
So basically loss and damage, we're looking at all the impacts that's coming with climate change, both what you can easily quantify, or what you can monetize, but also what you can't monetize.
For example, through increases in droughts or floods or cyclones, sea level rise, etc. But the really important thing about loss and damage is it's about really acknowledging that we've not done enough to cut our emissions and we've not done enough to adapt to climate change, and that therefore actually what we need to do now is help with people who are already being impacted by climate change.
So climate change is often treated as a future crisis, but for countries like Malawi, it's here now and is only going to get worse. So communities urgently need support to do what's called climate adaptation, such as building flood defences or irrigation systems. But they also need support to deal with the climate impacts they're seeing now, so to rebuild their homes, schools, health centres, and also to repair and improve the adaptations they had already made, but which are now not strong enough to hold back the storms.
This, we feel, is more, if you please, I may use that word, more like climate justice, economic justice, because the countries that suffer most have contributed least to where the world finds itself. But we're struggling right now. We were trying to go several steps forward, and then we are pushed more steps backwards. And there are more vulnerable countries like Malawi who are struggling. So this is an important one.
For a long time, countries in the Global South had argued that we need to establish a finance mechanism, a fund, to help communities who are already being impacted by these things to recover from climate impacts. And yet that was resisted for a very long time by all of the countries in the developed world.
Until COP26 in Glasgow. So in Scotland, we led the way at COP26. And what that showed is that it's not about the country that can necessarily provide the most money. Of course, the level of resource is important, but it's about showing leadership. And that's why loss and damages was so important for Scotland. It was really important to recognise that, again, those countries that suffer the worst impacts of climate change, well, they are not the ones that are responsible for it. We often, in the global north, are the ones responsible, and therefore we should be paying, we should be putting our money where our mouth is.
When you have friends, long-time friends like Scotland and others, knowing that as humanity, we belong together, there is a point where people begin to realize that if one part of the world doesn't make it, we all don't make it.
This morning we visited GVH Mambundungu. This is part of the loss and damage program from the Scottish government.
Tinasamusidwa kuchokera mu 2015 kunchua pamene tinabwera kumota boma inaganiza potisamusira kuntunda ife tinavomera mafumu ngakhale magrupu ngakhale tiye anatipezera malo kuno kwa Lundu ndipo titabwera tidali osangalala kuona kuti malo ndi achikondwerero komanso mwina ngoti ngathe kutukula miyoyo yathu fukatapewesa miyoyo kuti isafe.
When Tropical Cyclone Anna and Storm Gombe hit the area, the houses were washed away by the heavy rains. Property and livestock, the people lost their livestock. There were also injuries because the people had to be rescued so that they won't be washed away by the floods.
Ndipo past 13 kusoenza kuti china chilichonse chomwe tinkadalira mbuzi ngakhale kuti nkhuku ziwe china chilichonse cha nyumba phatikiza nyumba tilibe china chilichonse mutenti tikugona mu anthu 15 nde pamene timazindikira kuti panopo tundi pantsinje.
So the most important part of this program is that it's community led, that the community identifies the priorities and the activities are owned by them. So at the very start of the program, our partners worked with the community to identify their priorities and what they wanted. The community were really clear about what they wanted, and they were also really clear that they didn't want this type of devastation or flooding to happen again. So that's why we also invest in adaptation work to make sure that when the rains come, the communities feel safe.
Ndizona tukuona kusinthika chifukwa chakuti pamene itayamba kadi kuyamba kugwira nafe ntchito kuyamba kufukula nkulo komanso kuyika masaka kunabwera mvula pakatipa osoyesa mtendereso koma tinaona kuti tagona tulo bwinobwino popanda china chilichonse pomwe kale ngadakhala kuti kulibe nkulo kufukuliwa kapena matumba kuja kuchinjikira nde kuti ife pano tingadagona panja kapena kuswa mtendereso okwanira.
If you are to build a flood defense or sandbanks, to reinforce that you would need to have the trees, grass, whatever vegetation you want to grow on there. So that's why the communities are raising those tree seedlings so that they can plant along those areas so that it can hold the banks. But also, yeah, it's very important to conserve the catchment so that when the rain comes, it does not bring a lot of siltation, there's not a lot of soil erosion, so that there's no further flooding happening.
Yeah, so this is the Mpaso CBCC, Community-Based Child Center, where the children under 5 come to learn some of the basics of school, issues like the alphabet, vowels. This is where they have to learn it first before they go to primary school, grade 1. It's break time, and the children are being fed the porridge.
Okay, my name is Michael Mwale. I work for Churches Action and Relief and Development CARD, and I'm the resilience officer for CARD. And what happened here during Cyclone Anna
and Cyclone Gombe, they were affected by some of the strong winds that impacted the area. So they lost the veranda for the kitchen, and their storerooms were also destroyed, especially the roof. So it had a huge impact in terms of the community setting, because the kids could not go to learn and could not catch up with their friends that are at the same age going to primary school. Some have their meals here at the school, so they couldn't access such meals. So it was challenging for the children, and not only the children but even their parents, because now they have to work in the farms, but they also need to take care of the children. So at least when the child care center is active, they're able to have the children here at school whilst they're doing other duties expected by the household.
So this has been rebuilt?
Yeah, that was the one that was seriously damaged because of Anna and Gombe. So with the coming of Loss and Damage project, GAD through Chakwera has managed to provide us with the materials so that we may replace how it was before. So as you can see, the artisans are on their duties trying to rebuild.
Yeah, so before the project began, we had to do an assessment. So during those assessments, the communities were able to prioritize what to do with such a funding base. So that's when we decided that at least the communities can be assisted with this rehabilitation works because it came from them.
The program sponsored local builders doing the reconstruction to be trained on the Malawian government Build Back Better initiatives, which highlights particular techniques, standards and quality to make sure these buildings can withstand the next storm.
It has made huge differences in the people and their livelihoods because they're told or encouraged or given a hand up. So the resilience we talk about becomes a practical issue. And countries like Scotland and what they're doing is what everybody else needs to be doing. Not talking like it's some aid, but it is, hey, let's take responsibility together. And this thing, we're in it together and we need to work as nations together.
Loss and damages, I would like to see more pledges coming from right across the world. Scotland will also look to see what more we can do in that regard. But let's make sure that we're not dragged kicking and screaming by those partners in the Global South, that we're truly listening to them and acting so that together we can create a more sustainable future for our planet.
Being a citizen of Malawi, a country that has experienced loss and damage due to climate change, I felt like it's one way of retrieving the hope that was dead in us.
Zikomo kwambiri nene kuti project imene kuno kwathu yapereka chimwemwe chachikulu chifukwa zoyembekezera zathu panopo tinene kuti moyo wathu kukhala no pamtendere chifukwa kukhala kulira nthawi ndi nthawi chimakhala chinthu chopweteka panopo ngakhale tikulira kuti izi zapita chifukwa chakuchuluka kwa mvula koma mtendere wa mumtima tili nawo chifukwa pamene timakhala tili pati tili pomwepo komanso chitukuko chimene mwatipasa ichi tikuyamikira koposaposa kuonjezera pamenepo nyumba zimene mukufuna mutimangire.
In that community, we are implementing the loss and damage program. We are there to support them, first of all, by making sure that they are protected. You know, there's that river, Palombe, which more or less separates Zomba and Palombe. That river, sometimes it overfloods. The moment it overfloods, then it more or less affects the people in that particular area.
So years ago, the community worked with government and other agencies to build an earthen dike to protect their homes from flooding. And that dike withstood very well until 2022 when they were first hit by Storm Anna. And it withstood Storm Anna, but 6 weeks later, another cyclone hit, which was unprecedented. And that cyclone collapsed the dike and their homes were flooded. And they lost so much during that cyclone. So when we started this program, our local partners always first go to the community and work with them to understand what their priorities are and what's most important for them. And the community said, we need that dike rehabilitated as soon as possible. The rainy season is coming. We need our homes protected, because if this dike is not rehabilitated, we will be flooded again. So partner Katikomzomba and the communities and the government all work together to rehabilitate that dike.
2-3 weeks ago, we experienced 2 floods consecutively. The first floods, it came, but it didn't collapse the dike, and the second one, it didn't. The green maize that we are seeing yesterday, it would have not been there. Zokuti anthu amene akhuzidwa kuno tiziloza chala ndi mbiri yayikulu, ndipo mukapitirize akuti panalipoyeserera tingoyang'ana kumwamba kuti kukhale nokuthekera ikale project yokhazikika kuona ngati ife moyo wathu zasintha.
It was a deliberate initiative under the loss and damage to also take into consideration the non-economic losses. So when we're doing our assessments for this project, it was revealed that this community usually faces flooding in their graveyard.
And they told us, they said that they've been asking donors and they've been lobbying their own government representatives in the area for support to protect their graveyard because it was important for them. There was no money for something like that. And yet we think that that's really important. Of course, a graveyard is a really important cultural commodity or artifact, whatever you want to call it, for that community. And the loss and damage money, through acknowledgement of the importance of that, was able to provide that finance, and that was really important to them.
Yeah, so that's why we're here in this graveyard in GVH Mbenje in Sanje, which is an example of a community that has taken that initiative to, with support from the project, to protect their graveyard from any further flooding.
It's really, really important when you're doing this kind of work that you work very closely with local government. Usually in countries like Malawi, governments, especially local government, they have well-considered policies in place and practices about how they're going to support communities like this, but they simply don't have the resource to access very many people at all. So it's really important for organisations like ours to work in collaboration with them to make sure that we're not duplicating effort, to make sure that we're going to the most vulnerable and needy places and we're filling the gaps in the government, because ultimately the long-term solution is a strong state which is able to respond to people's needs.
This particular project, it has helped us. We've seen some evidences demonstrated that some villages who were assisted, their lives were saved. So that's a very positive impact immediately of the project that has been taking place in the country. We would want to encourage the Scottish government to increase the support to the government of Malawi so that such projects could continue and will help save and reduce loss of life and loss of damage to property.
If this can be replicated everywhere, vulnerable countries like Malawi will feel like, as a world, we are taking responsibility to say, this fight belongs to all of us. And I believe that this example will serve as a prototype of what could happen. Because we must not just keep talking. This fund needs to be supported big time so everyone rises together.
I would urge every country to follow Scotland's lead, but I can also give you a commitment from a Scottish Government perspective that we won't rest on our laurels. We'll seek to do more in order to play our part in tackling the climate emergency.
I think it was a milestone that the countries agreed on the loss and damage fund. And our expectation is that from COP27 to COP28, there has to be a very clear work program in terms of how we want to define the structure of the funding mechanism itself.
when the fund is established, it will be very good to make it easily accessible, because at the moment it's very hard for countries that are facing the impacts of climate change to have access to them.
Zitukuko zimene zikubwera kuno kuti zisakhale apa poyesera iyayi koma zipitirire.
Action on loss and damages is needed today, is needed and required immediately and urgently. So I would urge every country to follow Scotland's lead.
It is critical that we do something, not do nothing.